Is Sarah Peltier, and I work for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, or DWR for short. You may be familiar of us as DGIF, the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. A couple years ago, our agency just changed names. We still do all the same stuff, hunting, fishing, and boating. I'm a district wildlife biologist, so I have 7 counties that I cover, Nelson County being one of those counties. And I do a wide range of wildlife and habitat related work. So not just bears, although I love bears and I'm happy to talk about them. They certainly dominate a lot of my time seasonally. But just so that you know, I do a whole bunch of other stuff as well. I'm based out of Bedford County, so not too terribly far away. We have a local office there. So we'll jump right in. This is Black Bear 101. I'm going to cover a ton of information, and so it's going to be a little bit of an overload, but hopefully there's something valuable here that you guys can take home as homeowners or vacationers here at Wintergreen. So we're going to go over some black bear history. We're also going to touch on biology and behavior, which are really important. We'll talk a little bit about management and then really focus a lot of our time on human-bear conflicts, a little bit about some of the research our agency does when it revolves around bears, and then some mange in there as well, which probably a lot of you have heard of. Oh, and I'll mention, we'll just hold questions if you don't mind till the end. We'll have plenty of time for whatever you guys want to ask. I always start with this. I know this probably seems really silly, but who can tell me what kind of bears we have in Virginia?
Black.
Very good. Okay, we have black bears. There's a lot of misconceptions. People think that we have brown bears, or the synonymous name is grizzly bears, but we don't. This is the only species of bear that we have in Virginia, is just the black bear. Now, black bears are usually consistently all black, like you see here, except for that brown on the muzzle. Some bears have a chest blaze, which is just a white mark or a check or a V on their chest. But not every black bear has that. Some of them do. Sometimes, and this is not too common in Virginia, but other states that have black bears, you can have a cinnamon or brown colored black bear. So I think sometimes that's where people get confused, that they think, oh, we also have brown bears. But no, sometimes black bears can appear more brown in color. But in Virginia, that's not all that common. They're going to look like this, what you see here. All right, so a little bit about a black bear's history. This is a native species to Virginia. And in fact, the black bear is a huge conservation success story here in Virginia. Around the time of colonization, Jamestown, early 1600s, black bears were abundant throughout the state, on the East Coast, into the Piedmont, and then into the mountains. And just like any other species, deer, elk, mountain lion, you name it, when people colonized Virginia, they started hunting these animals for meat, for clothing, for everything and anything. And to the point at which the population suffered dramatically. The population decreased and decreased and decreased till there were almost very little bears left in the state. We had remnant populations in the mountains and then also in the Dismal Swamp. Now, our agency was created in 1916, and black bears were listed as a game species in 1930. And now that meant that we were adding protection to that species. We were managing how we took care of our black bear population, how that animal was harvested, when, how many, the time of year. And that and a bunch of other things like habitat restoration, habitat enhancement led to a rebound or regrowth of our black bear population. And now our population statewide is doing really great. In fact, all of Virginia is considered bear country, with the exception of the far eastern shore, where you can see a bear, but it's not all that common. Everywhere else, bears are here, they're here to stay, they're doing good. In fact, we've got more bears showing up in places where they haven't been in a long time, and they're expanding and growing every year. Okay, let's talk a little bit about their biology. Now, this is really the meat and potatoes of bears, and this will help, hopefully, people understand why bears ultimately cause conflict with humans. It has to do with their senses in particular, but we'll talk about behaviors, their habitat requirements, movements, diet, reproduction, which is really fascinating, and then we'll touch on hibernation, and I'll tell you why that's in air quotes here in a second. Okay, so a little bit about a weight of our black bears. Males in Virginia, also called boars, are larger. So they're anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds. The largest documented in the state was over in Suffolk County, so that's eastern Virginia, and it was 740 pounds. It's a big bear. That's a very big bear. Females, which are also known as sows, are a little bit smaller. They're anywhere from 100 to 250 pounds, but they can be greater than 300. But you usually can tell the sex of a bear based on size, is why I'm saying this. So if you're driving down the road and you see a bear run across the road and it's just huge and you're like, oh, that thing was 500 pounds. Best guess is that that probably is a male bear. Female bears tend to have more of a slender, more fox-like muzzle, in my opinion. They look a little bit more feminine. Whereas the male bears, and it's hard to see in this photo, but they've got big, blocky heads, and look I'm just helping you guys understand what you're seeing on the landscape. The other really cool thing about bears, so of course they've got these beautiful big ears. If you see a bear that's maybe on the smaller side and it's got really big Mickey Mouse ears, is what I like to call them, that's probably a younger bear. And that's because as the bear gets older, their ears will appear smaller. Now, the ear size is not changing, it's just that the head size is growing. So if you see a really big bear and it's just got these little ears, you know, that's an older bear. If you see a normal, average, maybe small sized bear and it's got these big radar Mickey Mouse ears, that's maybe a yearling or a subadult. So as the bear ages, their heads get bigger, the ears appear smaller in size. And this is a picture of a cub. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. Okay, so bears have 5 toes, and they have very large, sharp, non-retractable claws. So their claws are out all the time. And these are tremendous in helping them survive. They use them to climb trees, to dig up insects. Kathy was mentioning earlier that I guess some bears have been getting into bees' nests or yellow jacket nests in the ground, so they'll dig those up. They also love to dig on fallen logs where there's grub and larvae. They also will use it just to mark their territory. So a lot of bears love to scratch up against trees, and they're called marking trees. So they'll rub their scent all over that tree. They'll scratch it up so that when another bear comes by, it knows, oh, Mr. So-and-so lives around here, and this is where he spends a lot of time. So they're very strong, very powerful, again, non-retractable, 5 toes. Okay, so let's talk about their senses. And again, this is what's really, really important. Bears have eyesight that's similar to you and I. They can see in color, but their long distance vision is pretty poor. Their eyes are actually really small. So if something's far away from a bear, they're not really seeing it all that well. It's maybe a little blurry, a little fuzzy. That's why if you've ever encountered a bear and you might be from some distance away from it, and it's just sort of like looking at you and like maybe looking and looking and looking. It's trying to figure out what the heck it's looking at, especially if you're far away. Being able to see in color does help them forage for something that's really important in their diet, which is soft mast, and we'll talk about that. Have really good hearing. In fact, they usually hear or smell you before they ever see you, and they will leave the area. But it is their sense of smell that gets them in trouble, unfortunately. And this is really sad because it's such an incredible, from a biological standpoint, the way that bears are able to smell is just so fascinating and so amazing. We know that black bears can smell from over a mile away. There's some folks who suggest it's even further than that. Their sense of smell is also said to be 7 times greater than a bloodhound's. So if you think of what a bloodhound is capable of doing, you let it sniff like the hairbrush or a t-shirt from a lost child, it goes tracking through the woods and, God willing, it finds that lost individual. That is already unfathomable from my standpoint, and then you add on that a black bear is 7 times greater than that. It's just so amazing, and it has something to do with this Jacobson's organ. It's also called the vomeral nasal organ. It's an organ on the roof of the mouth in the nasal cavity, and I'm about to show you a really short video on a dog's sense of smell, and it'll help paint the picture of what this organ does and what it means. And the last thing I want to touch on here, sometimes people think that if a bear stands up on its hind legs, it's about to attack you. That's certainly not the case. It's just simply because of that poor long-distance vision and or trying to smell what may be coming with a breeze, it's very common for bears to stand up and just get an idea of their surroundings. So it's not an aggressive stance. That bear's just trying to see what's coming or smell what's coming and decide what to do, like you see in the picture of this one here.
Morning, Kelly. The tulips look great. Have you ever wondered how your dog experiences the world? Here's what she sees. Not terribly interesting. But what she smells, that's a totally different story. And it begins at her wonderfully developed nose. As your dog catches the first hints of fresh air, her nose's moist, spongy outside helps capture any scents the breeze carries. The ability to smell separately, with each nostril, smelling in stereo, helps to determine the direction of the smell's source, so that within the first few moments of sniffing, the dog starts to become aware of not just what kinds of things are out there, but also where they're located. As air enters the nose, a small fold of tissue divides it into two separate folds, one for breathing and one just for smelling. This second airflow enters a region filled with highly specialized olfactory receptor cells, several hundred millions of them, compared to our 5 million. And unlike our clumsy way of breathing in and out through the same passage, dogs exhale through slits at the side of their nose, creating swirls of air that help draw in new odor molecules and allow odor concentration to build up over multiple sniffs. But all that impressive nasal architecture wouldn't be much help without something to process the loads of information the nose scoops up. And it turns out that the olfactory system, dedicated to processing smells, takes up many times more relative brain area in dogs than in humans. All of this allows dogs to distinguish and remember a staggering variety of specific scents at concentrations up to 100 million times less than what our noses can detect. If you can smell a spritz of perfume in a small room, a dog would have no trouble smelling it in an enclosed stadium and distinguishing its ingredients to boot. And everything in the street, every passing person or car, any contents of the neighbor's trash, each type of tree, and all the birds and insects in it, has a distinct odor profile telling your dog what it is, where it is, and which direction it's moving in. Besides being much more powerful than ours, a dog's sense of smell can pick up things that can't even be seen at all. A whole separate olfactory system, called the vomeral nasal organ, above the roof of the mouth, detects the hormones all animals, including humans, naturally release. It lets dogs identify potential mates or distinguish between friendly and hostile animals. It alerts them to our various emotional states, and it can even tell them when someone is pregnant or sick. Because olfaction is more primal than other senses, bypassing the thalamus to connect directly to the brain structures involving emotion and instinct, we might even say a dog's perception is more immediate and visceral than ours. But the most amazing thing about your dog's nose is that it can traverse time. The past appears in tracks left by passers-by, and by the warmth of a recently parked car, or the residue of where you've been and what you've done recently. Landmarks like fire hydrants and trees are aromatic bulletin boards carrying messages of who's been by, what they've been eating, and how they're feeling. And the future is in the breeze, alerting them to something or someone approaching long before you see them. Where we see and hear something at a single moment, a dog smells an entire story, from start to finish. In some of the best examples of canine-human collaboration, dogs help us by sharing and reacting to those stories. They can respond with kindness to people in distress, or with aggression to threats, because stress and anger manifest as a cloud of hormones recognizable to the dog's nose. With the proper training, they can even alert us to invisible threats ranging from bombs to cancer. As it turns out, humanity's best friend is not one who experiences the same things we do, but one whose incredible nose reveals a whole other world beyond our eyes.
So you probably never thought you'd know that much about a dog's sense of smell, but fascinating, right? Okay, so that's that Jacobson's organ, or the vomeral nasal organ, and that is just what allows dogs and bears to have such an incredible sense of smell. It's hard. Oh, geez, sorry. Pause for IT relay. There we go. Okay. So when you think about how impressive that is for a dog, trying to paint that in the same picture of a bear is really hard for even me to do. But hopefully this is giving you some insight into, okay, yep, now I'm understanding bears get into trash, which we're going to talk about, bird feeders. They're not only able to smell those things from far away, but they can smell the contents of what may be in your trash. So it's just, this is unfortunately so cool, but it is sometimes to our detriment because it draws bears in close to home and close to humans and close to homes. All right, so a little bit about their behavior. Black bears are actually solitary. Outside of the mating season and a sow with cubs, they really are solitary animals. They spend time alone. They're very intelligent animals. Most of you probably already know that. They are also very curious and inquisitive. They want to check things out, particularly if it has an appealing smell and it might be food. They are what we call crepuscular, which means they're most active at dawn and dusk. That's the same thing as white-tailed deer. But with that being said, bears can be active at any time of day, so it's not cause for concern if you see a bear at 12 noon. Particularly in the fall, we're going to talk about why that is. Black bears are by definition an omnivore, so they eat both plant and animal material, and they are completely driven by their stomachs. They're opportunistic in that way. They're always seeking out easy food sources. So a little bit about their habitat requirements. It's honestly nothing really in particular. It's just they need food, water, escape cover, and den sites in the wintertime. Now, most people associate black bears with, mature hardwood forests, and they absolutely occur there, but they also occur in the flat country and agricultural lands, in the Piedmont. They need a mix of mature hardwood forests, but also early successional habitat is really important because it produces a lot of the soft mast that they like to eat. So a little bit about bears' movements. Bears do very certain things during different times of year, so to help you understand what's going on in a bear's world. The spring is a really stressful time for bears because they will have just emerged from their winter den. So we're talking March, April time frame. They just spent a couple of months, like we're about to talk about, not eating anything. So they're waking up really hungry. And they're also unfortunately waking up during the time where a lot of their natural forage is not yet available, or there's very little of it available. So you think of every spring, green up happens sometimes really early, sometimes it's much later, and that's going to impact bears when they're leaving their dens. The food is limited. Female bears will have either cubs or yearlings with them. We'll talk about that. Male bears are usually always alone. Summertime is our mating season for black bears. It's usually June, but more July, maybe lingering into August a little bit. But in the summertime, also yearlings disperse. We'll talk about why that happens. Some yearlings may linger with their siblings if possible. In the fall, though, which we're headed into right now, is another really important time for bears. It's not probably as stressful as the spring is, but it's really important because bears are now preparing for winter denning season. So they're going to want to pack on the pounds as best they can, as quick they can, to prepare for winter, because there'll be a couple months where they're going to spend time not eating. And during this time of year, that crepuscular thing goes out the window. Bears can be active for up to 20 hours a day, again, in search of food, trying to pack on the pounds. So what do bears eat? Well, they're omnivores, like I said, and about 75% of their diet is vegetative matter. Soft and hard mast are really important for black bears. So soft mast is berries, so like blackberries, any soft cherries. Hard mast is your acorns, your beech nuts, walnuts. Again, those are really hitting the ground in the fall, and bears hone in on that and take advantage of that. They also will eat tender forage like grasses. About 25% of their diet is insects mostly. So I mentioned the bees' nests. They actually don't really love honey. Pooh Bear kind of led us astray. It's more the larvae itself. That's high in protein, a good caloric reward. So they're looking for that. Some bears eat fish, although that's not super common in Virginia. They get it where they can find it. And then occasionally they will eat meat in the form of like a small mammal, like maybe a possum or roadkill. Bears are smart animals, but they're also smart enough to be lazy. So they're not going to expend a lot of energy or put a lot of effort into chasing down a small mammal to catch it and kill it. They just aren't going to do it because they're lazy, but also it's such a small part of their diet, it's not something that they're focusing on. So black bears truly really are just eating grasses, forbs, soft mast, and hard mast, and the occasional insects and larvae where they can find them. And like I kind of just mentioned, they're not good hunters, but they can sometimes prey on fawns. So in May and June, when fawns hit the landscape, and particularly in that first week of their life where they're hiders and they don't move, black bears will prey on fawns in that regard. All right, just to reiterate again the importance of fall foods, because up here at Wintergreen, and I don't know if folks have been looking up at their oak trees, but white oaks this year are not good. So there's not good white oak acorn production this year, which makes sense because last year was really good. Red oaks look pretty decent, so that's a good thing. So there are going to be acorns hitting the ground. I don't want to scare you guys, but I just want to reiterate that this is really important for bears. So they're going to be spending so much time active. They're trying to put on as much as 2 or more pounds per day later in the fall. They really are looking for those acorns because those are high in carbohydrates, those lipids, those fats. In good mast years, so like last year, for example, was a really good white oak acorn year, we usually see less conflict. And that makes sense because bears are actually able to find and get their natural forage, so they spend less time near humans. In years where we have bad or poor mast years, it can definitely impact survival potentially, the timing at which a bear will enter a den, but then also conflict, unfortunately. Sometimes we see that if there's not good acorn production, bears are looking for food because it's fall, they're spending 20 hours of the day active, they need to pack on the pounds, they've got to find it somewhere, so they're probably more likely to look for it around humans. Okay, a little bit about reproduction. This is another thing that I just find so fascinating about bears. I mentioned that our mating season in Virginia is in the summertime, so July, for instance. Bears experience something really, really awesome called delayed implantation. So what this means is that in July, when male and a female mate, sperm will fertilize the egg, and it divides about 200 or so times and forms what's called a blastocyst, at which point everything just stops. And that blastocyst is just going to float around in the uterus, and it will not implant into the uterine wall until that pregnant sow goes into her winter's den in about December. At which point it implants into the uterine wall, the cubs develop, and they have about a 6-week gestation at that point when you do the math, because cubs are typically born end of January, beginning of February. So really awesome biologically. And if that sow she may have multiple blastocysts, and she can be mated by multiple different bears. So sometimes cubs might not always have the same father. Wow. If a sow gives birth to 3 cubs, those could each be from a different male bear, or maybe 2 of them are for the same and one's from a different one. If in the fall she doesn't put on a lot of weight, she's really not doing good, maybe she's diseased, those blastocysts will dissolve and she will not be pregnant, she will not give birth. So if she's not in good condition, when she enters her den in, again, about December, those blastocysts will go away, she will not be pregnant, she won't give birth. So really, really awesome biological thing that bears do. Black bears do breed every other year. Now that's because when a sow gives birth to cubs in the den, those little guys are completely helpless. Their eyes are closed, their ears are shut, they've got very fine hair. They require the care of their mom entirely. They're going to nurse on her while they're in the den for a couple of months until it's springtime arrives, and then it's time for them to emerge together. At which point they're like, not this, they're bigger than this, but 5-ish pounds. They look like little teddy bears at that point, and they're capable of following mom around. So it's warm enough, there's hopefully some food, they leave the den. Litter size ranges anywhere from 1 to 4 cubs, although we have seen and heard of reports of 5 and 6. I feel bad for those moms. Let's see, because they reproduce every other year, that's because these cubs are going to stay with their mom for a year and a half. or 15 months. So they're gonna den with her again in their second winter. So they're born in January. In April, they emerge from the den, spend all their time with mom. The next winter rolls around, they all get in the den again. At that point, they're called yearlings because they're a year old. And once that spring emerges, usually in May, she's gonna get real aggressive towards them and kick them out. It's like, you know, getting your college-age kid out of the house. Like, you gotta go, it's time to go. And that's because she's gonna come back into estrus and she's gonna wanna breed. And if a big boar comes around and if she still has cubs or yearlings with her, they will sometimes kill those cubs or yearlings. So for a good reason, she makes them disperse. And those yearlings often are awkward teenagers, I like to call them. They don't really know what to do because they just spent the beginning of their life with their mom, now they're not. So they often find themselves in weird situations, whether that be in urban areas, looking for a territory, or causing conflict with people. Okay, so a little bit about hibernation. In Virginia, typically bears enter dens anywhere starting as early as November, as late into January. This depends on so many things, whether or not it's a sow that has those blastocysts, so potentially a pregnant bear. She's usually going to enter a den much earlier. Whereas a solitary lone old male, he'll just stay awake as long as he wants, especially if he's getting food. Dens in Virginia run the gamut. They look like some of these pictures that you see here. In Western Virginia, so starting where we're at, even further west, there's a high percentage of tree dens. How many of you have seen the tree den here at Wintergreen?
No.
Okay, well, I don't know. I should know the name of the road it's off of. It's right off of a road, and a bear has been seen. I think bears have been seen in it before. I don't know that it's used every single year, but it's a real nice big tree. There's a huge cavity at the top, and people have sent me pictures of bears sticking their head out of it. So, I'm sorry? Yes, that sounds right. Yes. Oh. Yep. So a lot of tree dens, but mostly, honestly, what I see the most of are these ground dens. So it's really just sort of like picture like a big bird's nest on the ground, usually under some sort of protection, like a lot of slash is down, or maybe underneath a fallen tree, for example. That's most often what we see, is just sort of building a nest on the ground with some sort of protection from the elements, because as you all know, it can snow in the wintertime, and so that snow is going to fall right on top of them, but they want some protection if they can get it. Now, bears are not true hibernators. If you are familiar with groundhogs or ground squirrels, those are considered true hibernators. And when I say that is, you could go in the wintertime to a groundhog's den, pull out the groundhog, and it's alive, but it's asleep, and you could ding, 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 and it's not going to wake up. I mean, it is out. That is not the case for black bears. They're very much capable of being active in the wintertime. They're capable of being awoken from their slumber. But with all that being said, they are definitely much more lethargic. So they're not, they don't really want to be active, but if they have to be or need to be, they will. They're just very lethargic. And especially those sows that are pregnant, they definitely are going to go into a den, because that's where they're going to give birth to those cubs. Their body temperature does decrease about 9 to 14 degrees. They do not eat, drink, urinate, or defecate, which is just amazing. Even though they are still very much awake and alert, they're not going to be doing those things. They're laying there, they're trying to sleep. Their heart rate does go down. Again, those sows will give birth to cubs if she has them. And during this time, because they're not eating, they could lose up to 30% of their body weight. That's why come spring is really stressful for bears. They're waking up pretty hungry. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about black bear management and why bears do what they do. This is real pictures, by the way. This isn't like CGI or anything. Okay, I just wanted to touch on a little bit. There's so much that goes into black bear management. And as an agency that's charged with trying to do our best to manage the species, we have so many different interests to consider. There are two really important things called cultural carrying capacity and biological carrying capacity. So biological carrying capacity is essentially how many bears can Virginia hold? That's the biology side. What can the habitat withstand? We don't know. There's probably not, honestly, a simple, straightforward answer to that. I would conjecture to guess that we can have and hold more bears than we do right now, based on habitat across the state. But there is that other side, the cultural carrying capacity, and that's how many bears will the public tolerate. Seeing a bear is such an award. For those that you have seen one, hopefully in a non-conflict setting, it is a very rewarding experience for me personally. I'll speak for myself. But that's a huge thing. Tourism around bears, if you've ever been to like Gatlinburg or anywhere in the Smokies, it's a huge thing. There's also the aesthetics and historical value, what bears have provided for people for a long time. Also just that they're such a charismatic species, and a lot of people just simply appreciate the fact that we have bears, and that's a great thing. But this is a lot of what maybe some of you have seen or have heard of. Bears causing conflicts with humans. And again, this all comes back to that incredible sense of smell and bears being smart enough to be lazy. So they're going to seek out these easy food sources because, let me tell you what, when you knock over a bird feeder as a bear, and I try and think like a bear as best I can all the time. It's not easy, let me tell you what. But, they can smell. So birdseed to you and I probably doesn't have an odor, right? You're like, that doesn't smell. But it absolutely does. And even an empty bird feeder still has an odor to it. So bears will come to those as well. But when a bear knocks over a bird feeder, it's going to sit there and it's going to get a huge caloric reward. Even if it's just a small feeder, they're going to eat all that seed. It's huge in calories. And oftentimes that caloric reward far outweighs what might take a couple of hours to gain by foraging in the woods. So they've figured this out. They have figured it out. They're like, oh yeah, bird feeders and trash cans and dumpsters. I didn't have to do a whole lot. I didn't have to expend a lot of energy, and I got to eat. Sounds great, right? That's kind of what we'd all like. So that's why bears do this, and this is what they leave behind, and it brings them close to people and homes. Now, as an agency, we try as best we can to track what's going on. We do have a wildlife conflict helpline, which I'll reference at the end of today, where folks can call and let us know what they're seeing, what's happening. And we appreciate this information because it helps us understand what's going on, because if folks don't tell us, we don't know. I'm not up here all the time. I can't know what's happening if folks don't report activity. So even if it's something simple as, yep, a bear got into my trash last night, or maybe it's something more severe. This other section here is things like property damage or maybe public safety concerns. But the majority of this pie, over half of this pie, hopefully everyone in this room can agree, those are addressable things. Yep. These are very, very addressable things. So a lot of the challenge with my job and anyone who works in bear management is trying to influence and change human behavior. Let me tell you that this is the hardest thing in the world to do. I would much rather be talking to a bear and telling the bear, like, don't do that, but this is in their biology, this is in their behavior, this is what they're going to do. So it's our part as Virginians to play a role to hopefully prevent this from happening. So we'll talk about it. Okay, I always include this side because I think folks think they know what we do or assume we do one thing versus the other. So our approach, our agency's approach when it comes to bears is really straightforward. We put a huge emphasis on shared responsibility. You guys are property owners, you're landowners, you're homeowners. When a bear gets into your trash, it is your responsibility to address that, or your bird feeder, or your dog food, or the cooler, or the grill on you name it. It's shared responsibility is our motto. We give a lot of education and outreach, whether that be over the phone, email, in person, making site visits, which we do occasionally do. We'll come and we'll talk to you about, help understand why the bear's been coming around, what you can do different, what you can change. Occasionally we'll talk about feeding bears. We'll talk about the warning there. It goes as far as sometimes we even harass or haze bears, which I'm going to talk about too. So trying to scare bears, teach bears a lesson. And our last step, and this is thankfully something that's really rare, when bears become a public safety risk, occasionally we do step in and have to try and trap a bear for humane dispatch. So thankfully all of this usually does the trick, but sometimes on rare occasion it's not the fix that's needed. Now, another huge misconception that folks have is relocation. Historically, this agency did a lot of relocating of bears. So folks would call our agency and say, a bear got into my trash 2 nights in a row, I'm tired of it, come and get it. And we would say, okay. And we'd run out there, we'd set a trap, we'd catch the bear, we'd drive it down the road, I don't know, 50, maybe 100 miles, seemed pretty random, into a national forest or somewhere that had less people and let it go. Now, hopefully you guys are already starting to pick up on why that's not a solution. First and foremost, it does not address the reason that the bear showed up to begin with. That bear was there on your property for something in particular. It might have been trash, bird feeders, what have you. And so it simply is not fixing the original issue. In addition to that, because the original issue was not addressed, other bears are going to fill the void. They're going to come and find whatever that unsecure attractant is. And then you've got your problem again, and then you're calling us a week later, another bear's here, I don't like it, come get it. The other fascinating thing, and this is again why bears are so amazing, we have put GPS collars on bears before that have been relocated, and it's just a slow march right back to where they were. And this is not, we have so much data that just further reidifies this. Bears have a homing instinct. So a lot of if you've ever heard of a bird returning to the same nesting site year after year, or hummingbirds coming back to the same site, same thing, that's a homing instinct. So bears are capable of finding their way back to wherever it was they were previously, and you can bet that they'll do it. I can almost guarantee you they'll do it. It might take them a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, depending on how far you moved the bear, but it will come back. And in the meantime, it could potentially be hit on the road while it's trying to make its way across the state. Or certainly it could be causing the same kinds of issues it was causing in location B, now in location A. And again, you'd never address the original reason why it was there. I harp on all of this because it's not something we do. People still think we do this. We do not do this. We will not do this. We do not relocate bears. We will not relocate bears. Instead, we're going to try and help identify why is it here, what is it doing, how can we address that. That's what the agency's focus is really on. So conflict prevention. I'm not going to go into the super details on all of these things, but there's so many ways that humans can change their behavior as such to keep bears out of human provided foods. Whether it's individual garbage cans, adding locks, leaving it in a secure building. You're familiar with the dumpsters up here at Wintergreen. Wintergreen has done a fantastic job at getting bear-resistant dumpsters, which has been a huge game changer up here. And I've been able to see that happen over years, so it's a huge win. Folks who have orchards or crops really have issues with bears. Electric fencing is a fantastic deterrent against bears. As long as it's properly installed and maintained, it does wonders, and I'll show you a video of what that looks like. A lot of people who have apiaries, bears love, again, it's not the honey really, it's the bees, and so they'll destroy apiaries and wreak havoc on those. And there's no sound with this video, but I wanted to just show you how electric fencing can be so effective. These are brown bears in Alaska, and this is actually at a landfill that they've put electric fencing around. You can see that bear has a collar.
He doesn't believe him.
Yeah, it is that good. It's as long as you've got the right voltage flowing through there, and we suggest about 5,000 volts, which is what any average fence charger that you buy at Tractor Supply offers. It'll do the job. It'll keep a bear out of whatever you don't want them to get into. Yeah, and thankfully, don't get me wrong, this is painful. If you've ever touched an electric fence, which I have many times, and that's what it's doing to these bears. There's no long-term side effects. These bears are ultimately okay, but they're learning to avoid a particular location, which is ultimately what you want. Okay, if you don't take away anything today, I hope it's just this. And you guys are all Wintergreen property owners and residents, so you probably know this, but the most important thing to do to reduce conflict with bears is to keep them out of trash. This is the biggest biggest piece of the puzzle for us. So whether that's these small cans or big dumpsters, that's the most important thing. Yeah, the couch. Bears, they crack me up. I want to touch a little bit on human influence. So you probably have heard the word before of habituation or a habituated bear. That just means that a bear has become accustomed to people, or he's used to people. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means that a bear lives in an area and it's just used to seeing people and cars and homes, and it just gets used to it, just like anything. Once you see something every day, after time, you're going to become very used to it, and it doesn't faze you as much as it once did. There are also bears that are considered food conditioned, which means they associate people with food. Now, that's not like, I see a human, I want to eat a human. It's, oh, humans mean there's food around. Now, when you put those two together, you have a potentially not so great combination. A habituated and food conditioned bear has a strong positive association between the two, and those bears sometimes are not afraid to just walk right up to humans. And that's not something that black bears normally do. Those bears are looking for a handout, they're looking for food, and again, it's because over time, and this happens, thankfully this happens slowly, this isn't an overnight thing. It starts as simple and as innocent as a bear gets into a bird feeder. In the middle of the night, you never knew it happened, but you wake up the next morning. That bear is going to remember bird figures hanging off decks. I want to do, so they do this over time, and then it builds to the grill on the deck, and then it builds to the cooler in the car, and it slowly gets to this point where they become more bold, and they're just willing to do what it takes to seek out these food sources, and sometimes that means they walk right up to people. So it's not something that we want to see happen, that's for sure. And as such, our agency has a really strong stance on feeding bears. In Virginia, it is illegal to feed bears. So you can't go out in your backyard and dump out a pile of corn or donuts or whatever so that a bear comes and you're taking pictures of it, or maybe you're even hand feeding it. That's intentional feeding, and that's illegal.